Welcome to SECT. I'm Cierra Clark alongside Noah Frary, play-by-play analyst for the Kentucky Wildcats athletic program. And make sure you first visit Underdog, our friends over there. Download the app today and use promo code SECU to score $75 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. Noah, thank you so much for joining me. You are just smack dab in the middle of all sports, really, because softball is about to start. You do play-by-play for that. Women's and men's basketball. We'll start with men's hoops. The Kentucky Wildcats had a pretty rough start to conference action, starting 0-2. They had that bad loss to Alabama. Kentucky fans were not happy with Mark Pope. What was that initial reaction like after that first conference game from Big Blue Nation?
Yeah, Sierra, thanks for having me on the show. That it's funny to think back, really just 5 games ago and how different the vibe was here in Lexington than it is now. You start league play 0-2, and then you run off 5 consecutive wins. But I moved to Lexington back in June, and the one thing that I've already come to appreciate is that Big Blue Nation gets really loud when they're losing, and there was some I'll just say it, unbearable evenings to get on Twitter and to see kind of the conversation around that program. But the resurgence and the 5 straight wins, I think, is becoming one of the biggest stories in the SEC. And this is a team that is starting to finally look like one of those teams and a true title contender in the SEC.
And you touched on the 5-game win streak. By the time this podcast comes out, the Wildcats will have finished their game against Vanderbilt. But I want to talk about that stretch that you mentioned before when Kentucky fans were not happy with how the season started. When you had your conversations with Mark Pope leading up to the season, what was the mentality headed into this 2025 year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was simple. It was to raise banner number 9 inside Rupp Arena. And that was the talk of the town here in Lexington for, over 3 months. And with how Kentucky's football season ended, people started talking about basketball as early as September as kind of a way to, forget about the Mark Stoops era at Kentucky and how that season ended last year. But those were the expectations. And then you get into the season, and obviously, Jalen Lowe, your point guard, goes down in the blue-white scrimmage and dislocates his shoulder and never was quite himself. And then Kentucky fans were waiting for the return of who they thought was going to be their savior, and Jaden Quaintance. And he's played a couple of games, but has largely been injured since. So expectations were one thing, and they were set when the price tag of this roster went out. Some have speculated it's north of $20 million. And I think some of those expectations may have been a little bit unfair to this program early on in the season. But, give credit to Mark Pope, the staff, the players for, trying to put things together and finding out how to play and find an identity for this program.
And the Wildcats are currently on a 5-game win streak. But what has been the key to maybe turn that switch on after that rough start?
Yeah, I think that, at times there was even some, intensity and toughness issues for this team. And I really think they've done a nice job of doing that. And, while you don't want to have it announced that Jalen Lowe is out for the season, I think having that announced allowed them to say, you know what, we're moving forward with this group of guys. I've said to multiple people, when you go into a game, you're game planning. And in the past, you would have been game planning to have Jalen Lowe, and then maybe he goes out a minute into the game and now your game plan has completely changed. So I think having some consistency, Mark Pope and that staff have done a nice job of putting together those pieces. And, I think the 3-point shooting has been much improved for Kentucky as of, I think last week they were one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the conference. And that was an area that they struggled in non-conference. So things are coming together. Obviously, as you alluded to, as we're recording this, they're going to play Vanderbilt, in just it's about an hour. And then Arkansas coming up this weekend. So, yes, you've won 5 games in a row, but the rubber really starts to meet the road over the next week. And I think we're going to learn a lot about Mark Pope's Kentucky Wildcats.
And the Kentucky Wildcats also very strong defensive team, holding teams to under 70 points per game in conference action. What's been the key to this Kentucky defense?
Yeah, I mean, it was a work in progress for most of the season, but, Mark Pope mentioned and told everyone in Lexington that improving the defense was a major emphasis in the offseason. You look at some of the stats, and I believe it's outside of the top 25 in KenPom defensive metrics. There's never been a team that has won the national championship. So that was a major emphasis. And from covering the Southeastern Conference, this is an incredibly physical league and incredibly athletic. And those were two things that Kentucky tried to shore up in the offseason. And I think the returns have been very good in that department. It has been the offense that has lagged behind at times, but particularly lately, Kentucky's defense has really given opponents trouble. And they've also had to rely on it in these games where they've been down 17, 18 points. They've leaned into that defense. They've been able to get consistent stops. And then that's allowed the offense to kind of come around and win some of these games late, like we saw against LSU and some other programs already over the last couple of weeks.
And I'm a Gator fan, of course, big fan of that national championship team. And what I thought was so crazy and what a lot of Gator fans did was Denzel Aberdeen leaving Florida after he won a national title. He's from Orlando and went to Kentucky to get a shot at winning possibly a title there. I mean, how crazy is that? And that is just honestly like a testament to the world we're in and of college athletics.
Yeah, I mean, your show includes the word T, and I think we're officially getting into the T part of things. But, I think for a lot of fans, you look at it and you say Denzel's probably in a great situation in Florida, but, had probably a chance to be one of the starting guards for the Florida Gators as they try to defend that national championship. But I think he saw an opportunity at Kentucky, and we'll be honest, the money was probably green, and that's a big reason why he's at Kentucky. But, when you talk about the resurgence of this Kentucky roster over these last couple of weeks, Denzel Aberdeen has been such a massive part in this. And I think he is a player that when the announcement was made that Jalen Lowe was going to be out for the season, who has really benefited from just the certainty and knowing his role. And you've seen him step up and play some of his best basketball. So I think there's a bright future ahead for Denzel Aberdeen in Kentucky jersey. But yeah, it's definitely a little weird, but I mean, come on, it's the SEC and it's the transfer portal era. Anything seems to go.
Anything seems to go, like John Calipari being the head coach at Arkansas.
Yeah.
Longtime coach at Kentucky, of course. The Hogs and Wildcats match up this weekend. What do Kentucky fans think of John Calipari at Arkansas?
Yeah, John Calipari is, a hated guy still here in Lexington. I think, there's probably, if you really dug down deep, there's still an admiration and a respect for what he was able to accomplish here in Lexington. But the last several years of his tenure really left, a sour taste, and that led to, the divorce heard around the world with him leaving and going down to Arkansas. But I do think there is a path where eventually John Calipari will, maybe have his name etched in the top of Rupp Arena. And, he was the last coach to bring a national championship to Kentucky and, obviously continued to elevate this program to new heights. So, yeah, there's no love lost. But I do think, time heals all wounds. And I would expect, much like Coach Pitino, who we saw come back last year to Lexington, Tubby Smith and others, I would expect to see that relationship mended over the coming years.
And you also are the play-by-play voice for the Kentucky women's basketball team. They're ranked 18th in the country. There are 10 SEC women's basketball teams ranked inside the top 25. What does that say about the depth of this conference?
Yeah, I mean, women's basketball in the SEC is on another level. I don't even think it's much of an argument to say that at this point, they are the deepest conference in America when it comes to women's basketball, and, incredibly competitive games all season long so far. You see Oklahoma go beat South Carolina last week, and then South Carolina takes down an undefeated Vanderbilt side. And the list goes on and on and on about these games. So I think we're shaping up to, a really fun last month of the season, and it will truly be anyone's game, come the month of March once they get to Greenville. And it's not going to surprise me if we're sitting here at the end of March and a SEC women's basketball program has hoisted the national championship trophy.
Yeah, and there was lots of talk about LSU this year winning it all. They're still honestly in contention for it. But when Kentucky beat them off that buzzer beater, I mean, that was just like, oh, wow, this league, anybody can win on any given night.
Yeah, I mean, that has to be one of the moments of the year so far. I think, again, give South Carolina credit for taking down Vanderbilt the way they did the other night. But that victory was huge for Kentucky and Kenny Brooks. It was the first ever top 5 road win in program history. And they went down to Baton Rouge and trailed most of that game. And Tony Morgan, who I would, venture to say has been one of the best point guards in the SEC this season, hit one of the biggest shots that you'll ever see. So, Kentucky's in a really good spot. You mentioned they're sitting at 18th in the AP poll this week, but, they have hit kind of a rough stretch lately, and it's been because Tiani Key has been out. You're sitting at 18th, but there's only 2 teams in the country that have 2 top 5 wins, Texas being one of them and Kentucky. So when they get Tiani Key back, which Kenny Brooks said is coming, hopefully within the next week or 2, probably ahead of the Vanderbilt game if everything goes well, this becomes a team that is going to contend for an SEC title again once they get to Greenville.
And you also spent lots of time on the East Coast before moving to Lexington. Talk about how your career journey has gone and what made you want to be a sports broadcaster.
Yeah, for me, it's been a winding journey. I don't have the same story that most do, that I grew up, wanting to get into broadcasting, calling games off my PlayStation. I always enjoyed sports. I enjoyed the business side of sports more. And, if you had asked me, my first dream was to be the starting shortstop for the New York Yankees. I quickly realized that was not realistic. And then it became to be the general manager of the New York Yankees. Obviously, neither of those have happened. But I, always wanted to be around sports, had a chance to get into sports information. That led to an opportunity to get into broadcasting, as a 22-year-old kid that just said, yeah, I could give it a shot. So did that. And then, 5 years ago, I made the decision to, chase my dreams full time. And I've been doing play-by-play all over the southeastern part of the United States, and spent time in 3 different states over the last couple of years. So it's been an incredible journey. If you had asked me 5 years ago if I would have had a chance to call games at Rupp Arena, to call games at historic Memorial Coliseum, that would have been a dream that I hadn't even considered at that point. So I consider myself incredibly privileged, and, I still get goosebumps walking into those venues and getting to be around the Southeastern Conference and Big Blue Nation here in Lexington.
And what advice do you have to any up-and-coming broadcasters or people just in their career that are trying to figure out this industry? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I think, hard work is a major thing. And, another part of it is building relationships. And, even this conversation is happening because of someone that you and I have worked together with. So, I think this is a very relationship-driven business, and that's a major part of it. But I think taking advantage of the opportunities that you're given, not being afraid to kind of put your dreams out there and share those with others in hopes that they become advocates for those dreams. So I've had an incredible run over these first 5 years. I'm excited to see where it all trends in the future. But definitely, I think one other thing that I would add to is, as you're going through any sort of journey, finding a way to be present is important as well. I think all too often we are always looking at what's next, and sometimes you just have to enjoy the current stage that you're at, because probably 3 to 5 years ago, you were dreaming about the current stage that you're at. So it can be incredibly rewarding. There are obviously challenges, as you well know, about this journey. But I'm glad that I have chosen to chase my dreams.
Yes, definitely a career where you cannot be afraid to put things out there. Speaking of putting things out there, the Super Bowl is coming up, and our friends at Underdog have plenty of odds for you. I've got Jackson Smith and Jigba going over 93.5 receiving yards. But what are you waiting for? Make sure you download the app and use the promo code SECU to score $75 in fantasy bonus entries when you play your first $5 on fantasy. That's promo code SECU. And Underdog, make picks, win money. You must be 18 and up. 19 and up in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 up in Colorado for some games, 21 and up in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. The terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offer not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. NY, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-877 HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Noah, thank you so much for joining me. And where can everyone find you and watch all of your work?
Yeah, you can see a lot of my work on SEC Network Plus, ESPN Plus. You can find me on socials at Noah Frary, on Twitter at Calls by Noah, on Instagram. So thanks for having me on. This was a ton of fun just to talk Kentucky athletics, talk about our shared journeys, and I wish you best of luck in this new venture and this new show.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.